Hi, I'm Felix, otherwise known as somebody who talks a lot about Hades and Persephone on the internet. I'm back, and today I want to talk about the Overly Sarcastic Productions video on Hades and Persephone, because whenever I start to talk about Hades and Persephone, people bring up this video like it's a definitive refutation of my argument, and I don't think it is. This video is actually very interesting. I think there's a lot of information there that I actually did not know, so it did give me new information, and I did enjoy some parts of it, but I still am not convinced. So we'll back up. Here's some background. Overly Sarcastic Productions is a channel on YouTube, and it's a really big channel. So if you're here watching me, you have probably heard of them. And they do casual and entertaining videos about a lot of different subjects, history, mythology related. They have two main presenters who go by Blue and Red, and they have voiceovers over artistic renditions of the myths and history of their discussion. Red is the one who does the mythology videos, so they're the one who I'm going to quote for today. Disclaimer here also that I don't know what Red's credentials are. I have a bachelor's degree in classics, but I have nowhere near the expertise that I hopefully will someday have if I go on to pursue my PhD and my master's. But I'm just a person whose defunct college is still giving me JSTOR access. So we're all going to thank Marlborough College for still giving me JSTOR access. And I just want to put it out there to thank Marlborough College for still giving me JSTOR access. And I just want to put it out there that I'm not necessarily an expert. I'm just making an argument based on information given to me. And I would like to encourage everybody here to, think about what I'm saying. And if you haven't, I'm happy to discuss and argue. I love discussing and arguing. The thing that frustrates me is I feel like I see a lot of people taking these videos at face value without thinking more about it. So I would like to encourage people to do that. And if you think more about it and come to the same conclusions, that's fine. Do your thing. I, vehemently disagree, but I cannot stop. So I want to start out by saying I'm very confused by the citations here, because there are not citations on the video. Like, there's nothing linked. There's nothing in the description that I could find or in the comments that cites her sources. Which I found frustrating. She does mention where she got some information. She mentions like her specific primary sources. She talks about the Homeric hymn to Demeter in depth, and that's easily accessible online, both in Greek and English. But she doesn't specify also what translation she's using or if she's using a translation. And that can really affect things. Like if you're reading a translation where the translator wanted to downplay certain stuff or wanted to accentuate certain stuff, you're going to have a different opinion than if you're not reading a translation at all. I think I heard somebody say that Red has like some of a classics degree, so I wouldn't be surprised if she reads Greek. It's me from the future here to say that I forgot that I could literally just look on the website and see if they said anything about their credentials. And it does say that Red has a degree in classics and philosophy, so that makes sense. And I would not be surprised if she did read it in Greek. And then they also mention Mycenaean tablets and some stuff along those lines. And I would really love to know where they read about those, where they got that information. I did some looking on my own. I found some stuff in various places. But I would be really curious to know where they got that specific like sequence of events that they mentioned. I could probably do a lot more research on this, but I was just really curious about that. And I wish they had linked more sources that I could read on my own. Also, I think I say it later in the video, but I do want to say that I do think their research is pretty good and a lot of their facts line up, and most of my issues are with the conclusions that they draw from those facts, not necessarily from the information itself. On their website, they have a brief little thing about how you probably shouldn't use them as a source for your schoolwork without going back and looking at their sources first, but I don't, like, if you're a high schooler and you're trying to write an essay and you just need a source and you, like, don't care that much, you're not going to go try to Google, like, Mycenaean tablets. So to me, it seems a little irresponsible to hide that on the website and to not just say it outright in the video. And I also just, like, how hard would it be to just put your sources there? I'm going to put some sources that I used in the description to this video or in a link on this video. I promise I will not be a hypocrite about this one. Because then at the end of the video, she goes, cite your sources or else people won't think you have any. And I felt like there was a little bit of audacity. They apparently do have a video on how to research, which is cool. They said to use their videos as inspiration rather than direct sources. And then, they give a quick little guide to what to include in a site. So it's just very confusing to me. If you're trying to educate, I would like to see more specific citations and more specific sources for like the level of original conclusions that Red seems to be drawing here. I would really, really like to see more about specifically what they read to. Yeah, so now that I've had this whole introduction, let's talk about the video. So I'm just going to go through and talk about kind of point by point what is discussed in the video. At the beginning of the video, Red starts by saying basically just that Greek relationships are messed. The thing that gets me about this part is that they say that they gloss over a lot of this stuff because it makes them uncomfortable, which to me seems irresponsible if you are an educator. I don't know if they would consider themselves educator, but they have a huge audience, and I think that's a pretty big responsibility. And if you're gonna educate and if you're gonna make educational content, you have to face the Greek myths are pretty much full of just really, really disgusting stuff. And if you're like telling kids about it, I get it, you gotta censor. They explicitly state that their videos are meant for teens and up. So I feel that they have a responsibility to face the uncomfortable parts of the myths. And they also kind of say, well, it's not really funny, which is true, and it shouldn't be. I think this is kind of why I actually don't like the style of video that they do on Overly Sarcastic. If that's how you want to consume content, I think that's cool. It is definitely very engaging. Their music is really good. The music like makes you want. But I find that it's really difficult because I can't tell when they're prioritizing entertainment over information. And I just don't like to learn that. I'm not drawn in. So I will also say that I'm not a huge fan of this channel for that reason. But I don't necessarily see that as like a moral issue or like even an issue on the facts. I just don't have to be funny. And I think you can also meld humor and discomfort. And I think you can have a video that's funny in some parts and in other parts is very serious. And I think there are people off the bat. And then they go into why people focus on Hades specifically instead of other gods who do bad things. And they say that because of Christian values, we want to see the gods as good guys, and Hades is the only one who ever really gets any flack for the bad stuff that he does. Which I think is pretty untrue. It might just be because I'm in very specific online spaces, especially. But like in my classes and stuff too, no one ever claims that Zeus is good or that really any of the gods. And I always wonder why people never bring up any in that kind of conversation, because like, for example, I mean, there are many goddesses who have not cheated on or sexually assaulted anyone. I think Demeter is actually a great example of that. She's caused a lot of harm, like any Greek god did. But like the level for me, the level of like kidnapping children, cheating on your wife, sexually assaulting people, that's like its own. I can see how some people would be seeing Zeus as this amazing, all-powerful, good god. But that's not the narrative that I have seen. The narrative that I have seen is that Zeus is an asshole. Even if people joke about him or sugarcoat his crimes, they call him an asshole. And then Hades is like this like soft boy. It might be different for some people, but this is my perception based on communities I've been in, based on specific here that I'm talking about present day pop culture, because in a lot of scholarship, especially older translations, you can see that people are looking at Zeus and the gods through a very culturally Christian lens and seeing those gods as analogs for the Christian gods. I'm also sure that people now are often coming at it through a culturally Christian lens, and in some ways a reaction to that more traditional, older Christian lens. But specifically when I'm saying this is the narrative I see, I'm talking about present day pop culture and adaptations that I've seen gain a lot of traction and get really popular. See it as Hades. Also, we can say bad things about the other gods without having to redeem Hades. We don't have to be like, oh, well, he did this, but Zeus did worse and Zeus told him to and all this. Like, the actions are still bad. It's all bad. People really like to sugarcoat and romanticize like all Greek myths, and I do, because you do have to face the the harder parts of things. I see the Greek gods just as manifestations of life. Because if you are living in the sea and you're trying to figure out, like, why did my friend die of the plague, or why did storms destroy my house, like, it makes sense to me to imagine gods who are unpredictable and sometimes cruel, who control everything. It seems to me that if you're looking at all the cruelty in the world and you're thinking, why is this happening? It makes sense that you would think there is a higher power I cannot predict, and that has its own beef with all these other higher powers, and with some mortals and all. And for me, that makes a lot of sense that people believed in the. Also, she does not engage in any critical thinking. She says that Greeks use the same imagery for kidnapping and for marriage. Cool. Makes sense. Let's talk about maybe why. Red brushes past this and kind of says, well, so therefore this isn't kidnapping, it's marriage. Or like, this imagery doesn't necessarily mean she was kidnapped, it can mean she was married. But let's talk about maybe why the Greeks associated kidnapping with marriage for a second. Let's talk about how maybe, especially if you're like a teenage girl and you are supposed to be married soon, but you don't really want to be, and maybe your mother remembers the trauma of when she was married and she didn't really like it. And let's just think about why that might feel like a kidnapping. Let's just sit with that for a moment. Are we good? All right, so I wish she had talked more about that, but yes. So from there, she goes to talk about the Homeric hymn. This is, in fact, the oldest source. She gives a pretty good summary of the actual story. She sort of glosses over the whole thing where Demeter hears Persephone being abducted and then goes to Hecate to ask who took her, what happened. It was not clear for me from that video that Demeter is alerted to what's happening because Persephone is screaming so loudly that Demeter hears that and she needs to know, like, what's happened to her daughter. But it's not like Demeter doesn't hear about it from somebody. She hears the screams. And I think that's very important. And it's sort of implied with the art in the video. The other thing that me is that Red calls it an arranged marriage instead of a kidnapping. They say, it's not a kidnapping, it's an arranged marriage. And that seems weird to me because I feel like in the context of this hymn, I'm not talking about like any other culture or even any, but in the context of this hymn, it's an arranged marriage that Persephone did not know about or consent to, that her mother did not know about or consent to. Maybe this is her father's arranged. For me, an arranged marriage where the bride does not know or consent and her mother does not, that seems bad. To me, that seems like kidnapping. And also the method in which it happens like kidnapping. Just in the, if you have a marriage, you have two people in the same place at the same time. And then you go home after. You don't just like. And then they talk about Demeter causing winter in a way, specifying that Demeter does set a kid on fire. I find that story pretty tame for Greek god stories because she does have a positive intention in that. It seems to me that there's a double standard where like Demeter does one bad thing and everybody's like, she's terrible. And then Hades like kidnaps a child and people are like, wow. And I just feel like there's a lot of like, this is interpretation based. This is my opinion. But I feel about, like when we talk about Demeter's winter, she causes an ice age basically. That Red calls it an ice age. I think that's probably accurate. Very interesting that the Greeks have a potential explanation for the ice age. I'm sure somebody's done scholarship on that, but I don't know. But Red has a very literal description of it, of Demeter kind of deliberately causing harm to mortals, which makes sense and is a logical interpretation. My interpretation is that it's more metaphorical and the winter kind of reflects Demeter's depression and reflects her mood, but she's not trying to kill a bunch of mortals. They're just kind of casualties, which I don't think the gods would necessarily care as much about a bunch of mortals. I think that's kind of, again, but that's a matter of interpretation, and the hymn does support the idea that Demeter punished the humans on purpose, and that Demeter specifically was trying to kill. I think there is room for a really nuanced story about Demeter where she's not a hero and she's not a villain. And then this gets me to Red says, quote, Persephone seems kind of bummed out and missing her mom. This is a point where the text is unclear. There's room for interpretation for a translator and for a reader of either the Greek or a translation. I use the text in Perseus, which if you don't know is just a place where a bunch of Greek texts are. You should totally check it out. It's a really great site if you're interested. Yeah, the quick translation that I did is roughly, he found the Lord in his house, sitting on his bed with his venerable, unwilling wife, who greatly longed for her mother. Bed is an iffy word. It could be couch, but it could also specifically be marriage bed. That's kind of a later version of the word, though. Venerable is kind of like a lot of stuff like honored, etc., but it could be shameful as well. And one translation that I saw translated as shy, which I felt was kind of like a cowardly way, because it actually meant a lot of stuff like honored. And I've noticed kind of a thing where sometimes translators will take specifically a goddess, she'll be described as something like powerful or knowing or honored or venerable like this, and they'll translate it as like weak or shy. And I think unwilling was actually pretty clear. Again, I saw a translation. The translation in Perseus calls that. That seems, for me, that word was very definitive. But again, like, it's hard because you have to look at the Greek and you have to look at it through the eyes of somebody living now. So, like, I don't know what the Greeks were like. I know what I think the Greeks were like, what I've been taught the Greeks were like, and I know the Greek interpretation. The main thing I want to kind of have people take away from this video is just that there's a lot more nuance and it's a lot more confusing than it seems sometimes at first glance. You always want to have a very concrete thing to say, this is how it is, but that's not. So some conclusions from the Homeric hymn. Red says that the hymn, quote, goes out of its way to absolve Hades' ability. But for me, the fact that Hades snuck Persephone pomegranate seeds totally ruins that claim. It's, for me, does not work, because nobody told Hades to sneak the pomegranate seeds to Persephone. And the fact that he did that pretty much actively goes against the desires of Zeus at that point, Zeus's will. I also just always want to ask, when people say, well, Hades is absolved of responsibility, it's not Hades' fault, Zeus just told him to. It's kind of this transformation of the, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you? But like, if your little brother asked you to kidnap and marry a child, would you do it? Like, would you do it? And then if you don't read Persephone as a child, okay, she did not know about or consent to the kidnapping ahead of time. Would you do it? And then people will come back with, okay, well, Zeus is the king of gods and has a lot of power. This is true. But if my little brother suddenly became the king of the gods and then asked me to kidnap and marry a child, I would not do it. I would face whatever punishment my little brother would give to me. Genuinely, I would die. So if you say that you would do, and the gods can't even die. Hades can't die. He's the god of the dead. So if you say that under those circumstances you would do what Hades did, I am judging you, and I am judging Hades. Everybody is responsible for their own actions. I am kind of applying human morals to the gods here, but Hades is responsible for his actions. Yes. And then this territory of stuff that's older than the Homeric hymn, which is really interesting. I did not know a lot about this before I watched this video. I still don't know a ton about this. I'm going to be honest about that. But I do really like some aspects of what Red says here and what it means about Persephone. I love the idea of Persephone as this badass, all-powerful goddess of death. I believe them that Persephone existed as a mythical figure before Hades. I genuinely like it. I don't think it's okay to romanticize the myth as presented in the hymn to Demeter. And I think we need to criticize why all these myths of like this badass goddess would have turned into, this gets really kind of hairy in terms of knowing anything, because we don't have a lot from the Greeks, and we really don't have a ton from like before like Homer. So anything we say today is totally working with what we have, that survived thousands of years, and it might be the truth. There are a lot of different versions of every story, and most of these versions aren't necessarily the Greeks worked with oral traditions. Stories were told and retold. They mutated, they changed. There may have been versions with and without Hades, versions where Persephone was helpless, and versions where she was powerful, and so on. It all depends on the teller, who was telling it, why, the festivals, etc., the specific customs of each region. We don't know. And all we have to work with is the works that have survived to the modern day, filled eyes. So, let's talk about it. Red discusses an older goddess called Despoina, whose true identity, true name is secret, but who could be Persephone. They say that Despoina's cult predates the Greek myths as we know them, and that Persephone may have come from Despoina. There seems to be evidence for this. It makes a lot of sense. Red's research is actually pretty good, I think. My main criticism is, again, I want to know where this information is coming from. I don't know what source they're using. But the version of this story that I found was from like the 1st century CE, which is pretty late. If we're trying to discuss things that were like before a lot of these myths were set in stone, but it features Persephone and Despoina as different goddesses. Doesn't name Despoina at all. Says that she's like too dread to name. It all gets kind of confusing. It's not at all cut and dry. And again, I think this is probably due to different regions having different versions of the story, different people have different, complicated and confusing. I also feel like Red kind of skips over the whole thing about the name Kore, which does appear in the Homeric hymn, unlike the name Despoina or anything, that clearly references Despoina. And Red says that Kore seems to be more of a title than a name and applies that title to Despoina. I believe she's also implying that Kore and Despoina are both names applied to Persephone to stop from getting her attention because she's a scary death goddess, which all of that does make sense. There's at least one version for how to... One source that I found actually quoted Plato as saying that people don't like, or Greeks didn't like to refer to Persephone because her name reminded them of the word phonos, which means murder. Other gross... Not want... So that makes a lot of sense that other names would arise out of a desire not to say Persephone. And it makes sense that then Persephone would be this dread goddess in the background, where everybody knows her name, but everybody... I understand that. And I really like some of this interpretation. It is entirely... and Red pretty much admits that in the video. They are transparent about that. And it is some pretty... It seems like something where there's no objective right answer. It seems like they're making kind of a fan theory about something that to me is just a lot more complicated than that. And a lot more complicated than you can sum up in, a 20-minute video with animated drawings and funny jokes. Again, which is not disparaging animated videos with drawing. And then Red asks, why is Hades so absent? And suggests that Hades is and that Hades came from Poseidon, and that's why his stories are pretty tame, and why he doesn't really do much. And again, Red is clear that they are not making things up, but that they are drawing. And I do think in an effort to make their point, they kind of skip over some information. I think they skip over a lot of complexity. But it's good that they are clear that it's their theory and they are the person who has come up with this, has put this together, that they haven't seen it anywhere else. And that is what you should be doing as an academic. You should be coming up with these new things to say and things to add to the conversation. So Red is adding to the conversation. Basically, then the conclusion is basically what I don't agree with. Because a lot of this information, like, she's got me. I'm with this video. I think that I love the interpretation of Persephone as this badass goddess. What I don't understand is why if Persephone existed before Hades and was the super cool badass goddess, if you are going to do like a feminist retelling of anything relating to Persephone, why are you not telling the story of her as this super powerful badass? I just don't get it. I would love to see more stories where Persephone is the only goddess of the underworld. Sorry, I just thought of something also. Red says that Despoina is supposed to be the daughter of Demeter and Poseidon, and then later argues that Poseidon may have. So I just drew a connection. But therefore, you are saying that the man who is her father has then mutated into the man is messed up. So yes, I don't think we should be romanticizing this. And I think what we should be doing instead is telling stories about Persephone as her own person, as the only death goddess if we want to, and as like a super powerful being. And I would love to see what those stories look like. Please. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of the conclusion of this, where she calls the idea that Persephone was kidnapped by force and misinterpretation, and then she uses my favorite sculpture to do it. So, but I just don't see how anything in this video discounts the fact that the Homeric hymn to Demeter is pretty clearly about kidnapping a child who does not consent to it, or not. Again, some people. I think the word kore being in there is in the child. And I think metaphorically, Greeks were married pretty young, and this story is a metaphor for marriage. I also at some point want to look more into the death and marriage in literature in general, because it shows up here, it shows up in Antigone, it shows up in Romeo and Juliet, which is many, many years later. And I'm sure you can find other places, to be honest, because I'm really interested in that relationship as well. Because I think this is kind of a very early example of that, where she literally is married by going to the underworld, and there's a lot of child. Also, other gods did worse things. That's true. It's Zeus. If I, for example, kidnap a child and then my brother goes and cheats on his wife and assaults a bunch of people, we both... That's kind of how I want to end this one. As always, I cannot control what you choose to read or write. I am just asking for some critical thinking. I would like some research. I think if you see a video like this, you should do some research. I would really, really love to see people come away with, like they said on their website, inspiration rather than the idea that these videos are, because there's a lot of speculation and they are clear that it's speculation, but then you cannot take the videos as fact. You cannot come to me and say that this is the definitive myth because there's no definitive myth. And then you cannot come to me and say that it is therefore good to interpret the myth this way because it's the definitive myth, because romanticizing a myth romanticizing this myth still says something about our society. The fact that we want to hype up Hades and make him Demeter instead of talking about the trauma that this would have caused both Persephone and Demeter. The fact that everybody wants to talk about Hades instead of talking about that's to me, that says something about our society. So this has been really long. This has been really rambly. And yeah, I can't tell you what to write or read. Yeah, that's been really. And if you want a book with a really interesting and nuanced take on the Greek gods, you should read Jo Walton's Thessaly trilogy, where she humanizes Apollo while also acknowledging the fact that he did do incredibly unsavory. And I think she does a good job of that. So I think if you are interested in a story where a Greek god is humanized and where his faults are acknowledged, thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a like, because I know a lot of people are going to leave dislikes just by looking at the title. If you want to argue with me, please leave a comment. If you want to tell me how right I am, especially leave a comment. And if you want to subscribe, please subscribe. I have never once wanted notifications for a person I subscribe to, but maybe you do, and you can hit that button too. Thank you all for watching. I hope you